My friends, we are living in perilous times, and I'm going to tell you what I think is about to happen. This is a hypothesis I guarantee you haven't seen floated anywhere else, so please stick with me. It pertains to what exactly is going to come from this Israeli situation. Something just isn't right. I think they're going to have to make a move very, very quickly, and I'm not just talking about the invasion of the Gaza Strip. I'm talking about something much bigger. Now, we also have copious amounts of nuclear news to go over, everything from nuclear tests or not so nuclear tests, but do not underestimate this. If you're familiar with the story, the nuclear tests which were conducted in Nevada that did indeed include radioisotopes, this is not something to be underestimated. This is definitely going to initiate a tit-for-tat escalation between the Russians, the Chinese, and the Americans if the Chinese aren't already conducting nuclear tests, which is part of the reason why this test was done. I'll talk all about the details in just a minute. We have countries issuing preemptive nuclear strike warnings, and it's not Russia. We have countries handing out millions of doses of anti-nuclear potassium iodine radiation medication. We got all kinds of new weapons being rolled out, strategic weapons, the mass production of anti-ballistic missile and anti-satellite technology underway, countries preparing for full-blown nuclear war, and we got reconnaissance wars in the Mediterranean and interactions in the Baltic Sea. The price of gold exceeded $2,000 today for the first time in some time, and it's only going to continue to go up. China is dumping its treasuries, and I tell you, you remember that old Sun Tzu Art of War quote that says, "Let your plans be silent as night and strike down like a thunderbolt"? Well, I think any day now, China could just do Taiwan and seize on the opportunity. They're liquidating their treasuries to an extent that nobody had originally anticipated, and it's not looking good for the U.S. What you're seeing here is an Iranian doomsday bunker with all of their weapon systems. They have extensive networks of deep underground military bunkers, and they're not just building it for show. Now, before I get into that, I have to talk about something else that's going on right now. Something that maybe you guys are seeing, but we're definitely seeing a narrative shift. Now, if you're familiar with this issue being the Palestinian versus Israel issue, you would know that historically, not even the left or right typically fully support the Palestinian cause. There's always a niche market of people who are anti-establishment, but never has it been taken on fully as a leftist cause. Well, now you have the poster child, Greta Thunberg, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. You're seeing massive protests all over the world, unprecedented scale, never before seen. It almost starts to look like whoever started these things, maybe it's all just a racket to sell Palestinian flags. But what I will say is this puts Israel in a very, very precarious situation, because we are seeing something that we've never seen before. And it almost starts to look like the Israelis absolutely are being utilized as sacrificial lambs, as much as the Gazans. As much as I have a lot of sympathy for the children who are currently suffering there, that goes without saying. For the people who suffered at the hands of these brutal terrorist attacks, you know, my heart goes out to people on both sides. It truly does. But one thing we have to keep in mind is I think there is a possibility that both people are being played here. Now, get a load of this. You're seeing these massive protests around the world, right? Massive protests, unlike you've never seen this before. Now, you have to ask yourself one thing. If this is genuine, which I think it is, I do think it's genuine, these massive protests that we're seeing. If it isn't, or if it is genuine, then Israel's got a problem, because that means they're about to be thrown under the bus by the military-industrial complex. You simply cannot sustain support for this kind of war when you already have anti-war sentiment at levels that were at the peak of something like the Vietnam War or the Iraq War. You never even seen protests of this scale during the Iraq War, or maybe towards the end of it you probably did, but nothing as worldwide as what we're seeing now. So what that means is that Israel's going to be left in a predicament where it's going to be fighting a war on 3, possibly 4 fronts. We're talking about Egypt, Gaza, and I know Egypt's still a long ways away, but Gaza, Lebanon for sure, which pretty much all the foreign nationals have exited and or are being extracted as we speak. Canadian military planes are heading there right now to pick up their people. And of course, Jordan, possibly, in the West Bank. Now, two of those, Egypt and Jordan, are at this point anyways, still, at least in name only, U.S. allies. However, you have a situation right now where this war is very unpopular, but the neoconservative, neoliberal, whatever you want to call them, deep state, are hell-bent on doing this. Why? Why do they need to do this? Well, they need to secure the Middle East. Israel is kind of the linchpin of the whole thing, okay? If that falls, there's no telling that Saudi Arabia is going to be able to continue to do the kind of trade. There's no telling if there's going to be stability. Whether you like Israel or not, they are an extension of U.S. hegemony, and they bring some stability to the region. And for that reason, that means that, why do I have Trudeau here? Well, because he's being shouted down in a mosque, which again is telling, right? It's telling you that the narrative is shifting here. So anyways, if Israel is not able to defend its borders, and the United States is not able to continue aid, but now we've already rattled this hornet's nest, we've created this problem, and they're going to be left to the wolves, then that means they're going to utilize nuclear weapons. They're going to have no other choice but to utilize nuclear weapons. Now, we know that there's a bigger play here. The bigger play is East versus West. The bigger play, as I've been saying for many, many weeks, is bringing military equipment closer to Russia, which is why we've had this tit-for-tat escalation over the Black Sea that I've been explaining. I hope you guys have been here for the last few videos, so you're kind of up to date. But essentially what you have happening is Russian forces are in Syria. Israel is threatening Russia now, or members of the Likud party in Israel have on the Russia Today channel actually threatened that after this war is over, they claim that they're going after the Russians. In what way? They probably mean somehow in Syria. Okay, so right now what you have a situation where both NATO and Russian recon planes, so you have the Russians spotting for Lebanon and Hezbollah, and who isn't exactly fully congruent with Lebanon. What you're going to probably see is a breaking up of that country into different areas, safe zones. The north will be the safe zone where the U.S. Embassy is. The south will be what Hezbollah commandeers. Anyways, so you have a Russian recon plane and UK and NATO recon planes just outside of Lebanon, as well as Israel. And what that tells you is that this is a proxy war. Okay, so this is a proxy war. So the grand scheme of things, the big move here is we got to find a way to keep Russia out of the Middle East. That's what they want. Now, if we don't have the support, the backing to do that, that means that they're going to be left with one option. They're going to have to create some kind of crisis. There's going to be some black swan event, and that's what I think they absolutely need. The only way you can derail this, the only way you can derail our prime minister being shouted down, which is nothing new. Don't get me wrong. I mean, this is pretty much a daily occurrence for him now. But the only way you can derail something like this, where you have worldwide, every single city, massive protests being staged, places where they didn't even know where Palestine was on a map 3 weeks ago, staging these massive protests. The only way is if you get some Americans taken out, or there's a warship that gets taken. I'm not talking conspiratorial here. I'm just saying this is what it theoretically will take to bring people back to wanting to support the conflict. The boogeyman of Hamas, it's worn off. It's worn off because this is Tahrir Square in Egypt today. It looks like a scene out of World War Z or something. And you're seeing this all over Europe, all over the Middle East, these crowds just, charging and storming the gates. And they need something big to happen, because this is not going to allow them to put their plan through. Now, the reason why the Gaza invasion is multifold. Yes, indeed, Hamas is utilizing tactics. They probably are more well-armed than we know. They're probably utilizing Russian intelligence. You have that Ilyushin Russian plane just off the coast, so they're probably being relayed information. It's not a stretch to imagine this, that Israeli Likud party members are so mad at the Russians right now. Okay, the Russians are sending aid as well. So it's very likely that Hamas capabilities are a little bit more than they expected, and they're scared about the tunnels. They're scared about the drone style warfare that Hamas is waging. I'm talking about the drones that, you know, you have the camera on it and they drop the bomb on top of the tank and all that stuff. That's what they're utilizing. Clearly they gain those tactics and skills either through the Wagner group, or somebody in Russia is helping them and help train them in order to do this, or at least through a game of telephone. Maybe Russia trained some group which trained the Iranians, which trained, you know, their proxies, or whatever the case. Or they're just very well trained in drone warfare, which they could be, because Iran is fairly advanced when it comes to drones. But there's that, but there's also the high probability that what they're trying to do is starve them out. And not a lot of people are like, you know, what's Biden say they're going to do? And Biden's playing good cop, and, you know, they're playing the good cop, bad cop thing. Biden's saying, yeah, you know, you got to exchange a terrorist, or whatever the hell Biden ASMR he's preaching today. But just ignore all that. Look what's happening with your eyes. The people in Gaza, there's 2 million people. There's not enough food. People are starving. People are drinking toxic water. They're trying to starve them out to force them into the south. This isn't rocket science. So when they've evacuated the north, and I think this targeting of the church, it almost, which you probably haven't heard about, but it was an actual church. It was an actual strike on civilians. Yes, they were saying that there's Hamas there. Maybe there's some tunnels underneath there, which there probably is. You're not supposed to destroy places of worship according to international humanitarian law, but you're not even hearing about that in the media. And that's basically because of what happened 3 days ago with the hospital row, and now nobody trusts and that was the whole point of that. Anyways, that almost seemed like it was a test to gauge public opinion. Now, we're but one major event like that. The Muslim world still believes that Israel did the hospital, whether or not we believe that. And yes, there's arguments on both sides. I'm not going to get into the details right now, okay? But because it's kind of just a red herring at this point. We're already many more civilian atrocities in at this point. And so focusing on that is just, you know, it almost seems like a planned distraction almost. So what's likely going to happen is they're going to starve them out. They're eventually going to go in there, but they have to do something quick. Because if they don't, this groundswell of support is going to reach a critical mass that the Israelis are simply not going to be able to handle. The war with Hezbollah has already started. All foreign nationals being evacuated from Lebanon. The prime minister there, the prime minister of Lebanon, who of course distances himself from Hezbollah, they're drawing up emergency war plans. They're going to be implementing martial law very soon. It's very likely embassies are going to start being evacuated as well. And they're going to split the country into 3 regions, probably like a green zone, a yellow zone, and a red zone, okay? Red being in the south, where Hezbollah, who is at the behest of Iran, is going to be operating out of, fighting this war against the Israelis. The Israelis don't have the manpower to fight a 2-front war, really, much less a 3-front war. So you seriously think these 2,000 troops that they're sending there, committing $105 billion for, 60 billion of which is allocated for Ukraine? Because again, that is the big play. That is the big prize. Israel is there, but really a lot of this is about Europe, okay? It's about, in their minds, protecting and the prize that is defeating the Russian Empire, the Soviet Empire. So, but they have to keep a handle on the Middle East. Otherwise, this is why they're doing things like today, they remove sanctions from Venezuela because they know the price of oil is going to skyrocket. They're doing damage control right now. They're probably going to have to start milking the strategic oil reserve again. So the situation is FUBAR. I don't think they anticipated. I think they felt that, okay, this atrocious attack by Hamas, that, you know, people would just let them, give them a blank check to do whatever they want. They didn't expect this. They didn't realize that we're living in a different world now. It's not the same world. It's a whole new generation of people that they created. So, okay, and and maybe the neocons, they weren't thinking this one through. Got to consult with the neolibs a bit more. The neolibs, they like to do their stuff in Europe, and the neocons, they like to operate in China and in the Middle East. I still haven't figured it out yet, but it almost seems like there's two, like if I was a conspiracy theorist, I would say like there's two groups in the upper echelons vying for power. I'm going to leave it at that. You can think on that for a while if you care to. But this is what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned that they're about to unleash a black swan because they have to act fast, because this public sentiment against Israel is growing, I think, far bigger than anyone ever could have imagined. You got Greta Thunberg, the poster child. Okay, yeah, there's this, thing where she's had an octopus, but that'll be, that's all in the past already. You have guys like Hassan, who were just being debated, what's his face, Piers Morgan, on YouTube, taking a hardline, staunch pro-Hamas stance. And that video got, I think, a couple million views. But what's more important is that he was on trending the day afterwards. He's on trending right now. He's in a video. So clearly, and I'm not saying all these social media agencies are connected, but let's face it, they're probably connected. So in some way, shape, or form, because, when you get canceled, you don't just get canceled for one. It kind of just seems to all happen at the same time, as if there's some shadowy figure somewhere. I don't know if that's the case or not, but we just have to look at historical examples to validate that theory. What I will say is that in that case, I should say that to get on the trending page is no easy task, and that means that they're okay with you speaking to a large audience. Now, it wasn't for that purpose, though, right? It wasn't for the purpose of, Gaza or Israel. And if he was on some other YouTube channel that had nothing to do with this crisis, but it's like a bridge. Oh, who's this guy, Hasanabi? Oh, what are his views on this? So you know what I'm saying? It's social engineering shaping public opinion. I know I'm sounding like I'm wearing a tinfoil hat, but, cursed is he who dares to think. And there's some people who would like you to not think that much. They say you're overthinking things. I say screw those people, because they're going to die when shit hits the fan. And you can bet as fast as they try to derail your thought process, they're going to be banging on your door asking for your preps. And you're just going to be like, sorry, we're closed. All right, now, I think you get the gist of that theory. Israel is either going to be overrun, they're going to be abandoned like everybody else, and I know people think it can happen. And if that happens, it's the end of the American empire. It's the beginning. If they lose Ukraine, if they lose Israel, if they lose Taiwan, it's game over. And let's face it, there's no way they're going to be able to hold it down unless they use nukes, which is what I think they're ultimately going to have to do. Israel is ultimately going to have to utilize the nuclear weapon. So if you're in Israel and you are just a civilian, I would strongly encourage you to really, really, really take preparedness seriously. I know there's been 80,000 requests for firearms. Isn't it funny how, the government tries to take your guns away until they want to send you to war, and then they're forcing a gun into your hands when it's time to go to war? Isn't that hilarious? But I would suggest, and I've sent some people some messages there, that I know that you need to either have if you're not like 100% loyal to this thing, if you are, I get that, I guess, but you need to have an escape plan, because they could be getting ready to just abandon you, to be brutally honest, and Israel will be left to its own devices. It'll have to use nuclear weapons, and I don't think that will stop Hezbollah. I don't think that will stop the Muslim world. Do they have 300-400? We don't know. We know that there's a lot of military equipment there, military hardware from the United States, the best that we have to offer. And it's in the pathway of the Russians. And if the Russians feel like their assets are threatened in Syria, then they are going to respond. So really, this is an untenable situation. It has to end. Someone has to win. And that only happens with a mushroom cloud. I can't believe that gold so quickly went beyond $2,000. Isn't that incredible? I want to show you guys something else here. Then we'll get into the nuclear stuff. Take a look at this. China U.S. Treasury holdings. It's at pretty much the lowest it's been since 2009. Now, that's somewhat misleading because people are not thinking about it in real terms. When you actually adjust this for inflation, we got $800 billion in U.S. treasuries that the Chinese are holding. Once they liquidate all that, the dollar reduces correspondingly, and it also means this is kind of like an hourglass, okay? And when it hits the bottom, when it hits zero, it's time for war. It's likely going to be time for war before it hits zero, but we're trying to liquidate their treasuries because they know when they go to war, it's basically going to be worth nothing to them. So at the peak, it was $1.3 trillion that they held, okay? Now it is $800 billion, but it's misleading because it doesn't factor in inflation. Right now, in 2009 that they're comparing it to, they're saying that it's at the lowest point since 2009. But in 2009, $800 billion in real terms in today's money would only have been about $540 billion. At its peak in 2013, the $1.3 trillion would have been around $1.8 trillion. More or less. There's been a lot of inflation in just the past few years, okay? So what this means is that the actual amount of treasuries that China is holding, this is very misleading, it's worth a lot less than it was. So in real terms, it's like 25% of what it was at the peak. Maybe not quite that, 35% of what it was at the peak. That's how close we are to going to war on that front, okay? So you understand that this is and if you don't believe me, look at this. This is Russian-held treasuries. So back during the pandemic, before the pandemic hit, and then suddenly something happened around here in March. Everybody started dumping U.S. treasuries in Russia. Maybe they knew that, maybe the Russians knew that this COVID thing, there was something else. This was a prelude to war or something. But there was around $12 billion of U.S. treasuries, or is this 12 or 120 billion, I believe. It was higher than it is now. Historically, of course, it was much higher after 2014. I'm sure there was a steep drop-off. But as you can see, it's now pretty much nothing. And what that means is that when there's no more trade and when there's no more forex exchange, foreign exchange of currencies, then you have war. That old saying, when goods don't cross borders, armies do. So that's what we're basically seeing here. And this is what brings us to the next issue, which is nuclear Armageddon. All right? Now, the nuclear test in Nevada, I'll talk about that in just a minute. But we need to talk about a few other things. What you're seeing here is the Iranians, every so often they show off their underground nuclear bunker. I don't really understand why they would do this other than as a strategic deterrent. Are they trying to signal to the West that we actually do have the capability to survive a nuclear engagement with you? Is this strategic? Because remember, all you people who think, oh, there's shadowy alien technology that the United States has that they'll use if, the Judgment Day comes. That's not true, because if that was true, they would want people to know about it. The whole point of strategic warfare is deterrence. It's about deterring your enemy from wanting to try shit. So you want them to make you think. It's puffing up your feathers, right? To make yourself look bigger than you actually are. This is why a lot of people suspect that maybe a lot of these systems that the Russians are pumping out right now might not even work. But the risk that they can work is enough to dissuade us from doing a preemptive strike. And maybe this is what the Iranians are trying to showcase here with their drone capabilities and their deep underground military bunkers, perhaps signaling that they actually have the ability to engineer nuclear weapons on the fly within 2 weeks, assemble them onto warheads, put those on deployment and delivery systems that they've already mastered via doing satellites and long-range missile systems, and that's going to be it. And this is just a deterrence. But, of course, perhaps this is why the United States doesn't want to engage them, that they know it's already too late, they're already under the Russian umbrella, yada, yada, yada. You've heard me talk about that all before. This is just some good sludge content for you to watch in the background while we rattle off the next story. We got North Korea warning the United States that they're about to do a preemptive nuclear strike. You can't make this stuff up, and they're saying this because apparently there's now been the deployment of B-2 bombers in South Korea alongside nuclear-armed submarines. Okay, so clearly they're sending a message. I mean, that's very, very close to China. Don't forget that. That would be similar to, it really would be similar to Russian nuclear submarines and B-2 bombers in British Columbia if Canada was theoretically, a part of the axis of evil, then, that would be the equivalent. So just imagine in British Columbia, just not too far from California and Seattle, having B-2 bombers and nuclear-armed submarines right off the coast, which they probably do anyways. But this is why it's been seen as a provocative thing for the North Koreans who are threatening a preemptive strike. And if you don't think that we're at that point where that could happen, you're just not thinking enough. You have to understand this from the North Korean point of view. Think about this from the North Korean point of view. You're one of the most sanctioned countries in the world, okay? You now have the U.S. military, the U.S. government, which is in its death throes at this point in time. This is existential, these wars, remember, because when people realize that, shit, we're going to lose in Taiwan, we're going to lose in Korea, we're going to lose in Israel, we're going to lose in Ukraine, then that's when they're going to get nervous. And we are one of the few countries who have already said, who've removed the no first use policy from our nuclear doctrine. We're the first country to restart nuclear testing. And yes, it's kind of nuclear testing, it's kind of not. And that's how they're seeing it. Plus, they're so isolated that they probably can't, necessarily culturally read all the signals. They don't know how to necessarily read the room, okay? So Kim Jong-un, who's he being informed by? Let's hope that he's not, I'm sure his sister and his family members are probably running the show and he's kind of just the figurehead. But let's hope that there is some other back channel of communication there. I'm sure there is with the Chinese. Anyways, we got Switzerland sending out 5 million potassium iodide pills. Now, they're saying, don't worry, this is just for nuclear power plants. This is what they always say. Well, the countries who care to do it. Anyways, there indeed is a country, even here in Canada, some provinces, particularly in Ontario, if you live around the nuclear power plants there, they will mail you this stuff. They will give you a certain amount of it because you never know when the nuclear power plant's going to melt down. This medication, this anti-nuclear thyroid medication, potassium iodide, blocks the radiation from being intaken into your thyroid. This is stuff which is going to also be useful in a nuclear war scenario. We've talked to numerous experts on the topic and they all agree it does have a utility in that respect. Now, Switzerland only has 8 million people living there, and they handed out 5 million doses of this stuff. There's differing opinions on how old you should be if you're going to take this stuff. But what we're trying to understand here is, why are they sending out 5 million doses? Does that mean that everybody in Switzerland is that close to a nuclear power plant? Remember, Switzerland also has 350,000 bunkers, I believe. They're one of the most well-armed per capita nations as well. So if anybody's going to ride out nuclear war and likely have a bunch of gold and chocolate when the smoke clears, it's going to be Switzerland, okay? Just another data point for your consideration. We also have the new avant-garde hypersonic glide vehicle Mach 27, okay? Yes, you heard correct. Mach 27, and it's navigable after it's ejected from the rocket, and it can glide down and it can basically defeat any missile defense system. Not that, I mean, even a ballistic missile could defeat a defense system if it's going Mach 27, let's face it. But this is the new nuclear weapon which is being loaded by the Russians. Does it look as though they're running out of stuff? I don't think so. But what I will say, and I go back to the short video that the communist cameraman and his graphics comrade had made, and it shows you what's going to happen when the conventional ammunition runs out. If and when we run out of conventional ammo, that's when it's going to be like a Mexican standoff between all these countries, where you're going to have China, well, not China, because China is loaded to the nines with weapons. And that's what both the Russians and the Americans have to remember, is that while we're depleting our conventional stores of ammunition, The Chinese are still sitting on a lot. Now, are they actually secretly helping out the Russians in that respect? Probably. But once we run out of those conventional arms, all that's left is nuclear weapons. And it's just a matter of who pulls the trigger first. And if you wait for the other guy to pull the trigger, then you're at a disadvantage. This is the whole paradox of nuclear war. If you don't start it, I mean, if you start it, everybody dies, right? But if you're not the first to start it, then it's likely that everybody dies, but you have a marginally better chance of succeeding. And you could even perhaps win if you do everything right. But again, there's so much we don't know about nuclear missile technology. Obviously, it's very confidential. They're not going to let us know everything. Who knows if this concentrated wave energy, whatever it is, millimeter waves, if that is going to be utilized in a strategic sense, if that can neutralize ABMs, who knows? We just don't know. If it can, then it's more of an arms race, right? It's just all the more reason to do a preemptive strike. Anyways, Russia is also mass producing S-400 and S-300 missiles. In the last 8 months, they built this new factory by Moscow. And the reason why S-400 and S-500 are so critical, S-400 are a strategic weapon. They have had those around Moscow for some time. You only have those around Moscow if you're planning on shooting down heavy-duty payloads, okay? Heavy-duty missiles, I'm presuming. S-500s can also be used to shoot down satellites. And as we're on the precipice of nuclear Armageddon, we're also currently in a hybrid war. And for that, satellites is a factor. And if there are commercial satellites being utilized over the battlefield, then Russia will be left with no choice to shoot them down, especially if it becomes an existential risk. In the Black Sea, it's not just 2 MiG-31s, excuse me, on 24/7 watch. It's actually 4 MiG-31s. Recently, Russia snuck, as they're saying, a fleet of aircraft into Crimea, 4 MiG-31s armed with Kinzhal and 10 Su-27s and Su-30s in Crimea. So what could they possibly want with that? Well, they're getting ready for the Black Sea. They're making a threat to the Brits who want to bring in their British fleet into the Black Sea. But understand, you can't just have the Brits start sending warships over and then through the strait of whatever the strait that Turkey controls there. Let's just go to the map. They can't just mosey on down here, right? Because that would be too obvious. Oh, geez, I got a lot of clutter on the map. Let's see if we can do, let's go to this. Let's go to the State Department map. So, you know, they can't just mosey on down here. There needs to be a reason why they might be there. So they have to position themselves for the justification. Now you have the American warships down here, and now the Brits can come in here and they'll be, well, we're just helping out the Americans down here. You got Royal Navy flying planes here. You know, you got Turkey now who's surrounded by American military bases. They're probably not going to like that too much, and American military aircraft carriers. So you have a situation developing where it's an entry point for Britain to potentially move warships into the Black Sea. And so this is part of the reason why Russia has the MiG-31s armed with the Kinzhal, is to not only put the American aircraft carrier groups on notice that, hey, if you decide to do something to our air base and our resources here in Syria, this is waiting for you, as well as acting as a deterrent for the Brits from entering the Black Sea and coming to the aid of the Ukrainians. At least that's as far as I can see it right now. We have Georgia, not Georgia, but I'm talking about Georgia in, the Eastern European Georgia, preparing for nuclear weapons, preparing for the use of nuclear weapons in the region, preparing for nuclear war. The Ministry of Health has outlined the distribution of medicines to the population. Here we go again. Why is it that all these countries are distributing medicines? At least Georgia is upfront about the reasons as to why they're doing this. Medicines to the population, treatment, including an emergency care scheme The provision of shelters, although this will become relevant if, God forbid, there is a direct attack, shelter will not help us in this case. Therefore, we must be smart, carry out pragmatic policies both within the country and abroad, according to that Ministry of Health representative. But they're doing this as a precaution. What other country just did a major nuclear exercise that involved a good chunk of the population preparing for full-blown Mad Max nuclear war? Russia, on the same day that they did one of the first most pervasive, far-reaching emergency alert tests here in the United States. All they're going to do for us is they're going to tell us that, you know, it's time to bend over and kiss your ass goodbye, and they'll probably won't even tell us that in enough time. So you're on your own, man. I left a tweet on Justin Trudeau the other day. I advised him that, you know, he should start building bunkers. We got to start developing the resources that we're going to need to survive a nuclear conflict, and start building up the military, because there's no way in hell we're defending this country in the current state that we're in. All it's going to take is a couple bridges, and they're going to completely disconnect one side of the country from the other because of the Rocky Mountains there. Anyways, Hamas. Israel is claiming that Hamas is their website, or official website. I didn't know they had. I don't know if they have a subscription service. Bad joke, but they were hosted on a Russian web hosting service. So Israel is not too happy with the Russians. And remember that there was a cyber attack on Israel committed by the Russian group, what is it called, Killnet, when this whole thing began. So clearly the line is being drawn in the sand. It's Russia versus Israel. And what Whiteman of the Likud party, which I think is a fairly right-wing party in Israel, has to say to the Russians, that we're going to finish this war, we're going to win because we're stronger, and after this, Russia will pay the price. Believe me, Russia will pay the price. So they're concerned that the Russians are helping out the Iranians and Hezbollah try to undermine the Israeli government, but I think the Israeli government's going to end up doing that themselves. They need to be very, very careful with the next moves, because I think no matter how they slice it now, they're in a position, either Hamas, they're just going to have to let them continue to fester and exist, or, which, you know, I don't think they're at risk right now of becoming extinct, or they're going to have to, I think they're just going to starve them out. I think that's the whole idea, is to try to completely surround it so no goods can get in. And of course, this is something they have to balance with the global public opinion, because if they're not allowing goods in and you start seeing pictures of children starving and stuff like that, it's over. There's going to be these riots that we're seeing right now. They're only going to grow by an order of magnitude. So Israel has to be very, very careful with how they play this. Now, in terms of what's going on up in Ukraine, remember, that's the big play. Attention will eventually shift back there. I do agree with Gerald Celente when he says that there's going to be some major event if they drop the ball on this Israel situation, and they're just going to leave Israel to fight the hordes by themselves and ultimately have to rely on nuclear weapons. They're going to take our attention back to Ukraine somehow. They're going to do something to a nuclear power plant. There's something's going to go down, which is going to bring all the public attention back there. Going to be headline news, okay? Or there's going to be a shoot down over the Black Sea. Something like that. Shit's going to go down somewhere. I mean, there's attacks happening inside Russia that we don't even hear about anymore. Like, you don't even, you know, there used to be a time when we were talking about drones targeting deep inside Russia. Now they probably don't even do it because there's no PR benefit to it. It's no Pyrrhic victory anymore if nobody's going to pay attention to it. What's going on in the Baltic Sea is that right here, okay, there was a pipeline almost between these two embassies, actually, between Estonia's embassy and Finland's embassy. There was a pipeline under there. It got destroyed, and they were thinking that the Russians may have sabotaged it in some way. Maybe they didn't use a bomb, but maybe some kind of anchor drudged it or something like that. I didn't even know that was possible. You would think that these things are built strong enough to be able to withstand that. You would think they would have to be, right? When there's so much ship activity through here. Anyways, now they're blaming it on the Chinese. They're saying that the Chinese ship was there. So you're starting to see, they're starting to implicate now the Chinese, who of course are the allies of the Russians, who the Europeans better be careful, because that's where a lot of their shit comes from. much like it does here. We don't have the industrial capacity to build half the shit that we enjoy right now. The Europeans pay way more for stuff than we do. Mark my words, I know, because I have a store that sells thousands of products, and I know that all of those items are more expensive in Europe than they are here. So they better be careful. But basically, the Latvian president said that if Russia is found to be behind this Baltic connector damage, so that's not only the gas pipeline, but also the the undersea cable that connects, internet and stuff like that, then they're going to close them off. Okay, they're going to try to close the Russians off so they can't access the Baltic Sea. How well do you think that is going to go over if they try to close out the Russians? I mean, that level of embargo is a declaration of war. The Russians cannot ignore that. They're going to have to act. So anyways, not looking good. Lebanon's being evacuated. American military bases are being targeted all over the Middle East. You got Iran moving missiles. You got Mark Levine talking about the Samsung option. Let's just see what he has to say here, shall we? This is fairly important. This is what we've been saying. This is actually a few days old video, but he echoes what I'm saying here.
If Israel is going to face annihilation, you think they have those nukes in there to collect dust? I'm not even encouraging anything be done. I'm not even saying nuke them, nuke them, nuke them. I am saying Iran needs to understand, and Hezbollah needs to understand, that if you think you're going to wipe out these people, you're not. And so we have to deal with reality. And reality is, but America's involved in this. America, I said they're going to drop them. In my opinion, they might. I don't know. I have no idea. I'm the only one bringing this up.
I just wanted to show that. I mean, he basically says the same thing I do, in that we could drop them. And if we do drop them, then they'll have no other choice to use nuclear weapons. And when you look at public opinion, you know that it's shifting. And Israel doesn't have much time to get this done if they want to. Get this done as in take out Gaza and placate the masses that are beating down their door right now. What you're seeing behind me here is some sus video alleging that Iran is moving long-range nuclear weapons. Now, of course, Iran's going to be up to a whole lot from a military perspective right now. And because they know that, the war is coming close. Yemen just recently clearly was trying to circumvent Saudi Arabia because it was along the Saudi Arabian coastline that they had fired this missile. They wanted to take out Israel or some target within Israel, and it was shot down by the Americans, which is a major provocation. I mean, when your country is shooting at, or when a country is shooting at you with long-range missiles, when missiles that require a nation state in order to bring to bear, then you know that it's deadly serious, right? So of course, there's a massive war brewing in the Middle East right now. That's why they're brokering deals with Venezuela to get the oil to kind of offset, because they know this is such a delicate balancing act, You got to balance, okay, we need the oil, but we also need to be in the global reserve currency. We need some level of instability, but not too much instability. We got to pull the Russians here, and we got to make sure that our military is here. This global domination thing is not easy. I must give it to them. I wouldn't want to be in charge of all that stuff. In terms of the nuclear testing that they did, and yes, it's not nuclear testing. There's guys tooting their horn because they discovered that this wasn't a real nuclear test. Well, no shit, Sherlock, it wasn't a real nuclear test. That's not the point. There was radioisotopes involved. This was in some way, some people would chalk it up to be a violation of the nuclear test ban treaty that the U.S. had never ratified anyways. The Russians did, and now they're getting ready to revoke that. So what that means is that this is going to be the initiation of a tit-for-tat escalation between the Russians and the Americans. Now the Russians are going to complement it by doing testing of their own. And the Americans are saying that these tests were done so that they could learn and identify, be able to identify when other countries were doing nuclear testing. Wink, wink, China. They want to know if China is secretly doing nuclear testing somewhere in that giant desert that they have over there. What is it called? The Gobi Desert, or some desert that not even the planes fly over. Anyways, so I think that's what this is all about. Maybe it's about how you're going to target, because they're doing all these tests underground for environmental reasons. It's possible that we don't even see any more above ground testing anymore, but understand that there still is. They probably want to be able to see how our modern digital technology, AI, maps on to nuclear weapons, because there hasn't really been any nuclear testing done since the early 90s. If they want to fine-tune these things for their electromagnetic pulse effects, because understand that if there's a new arms race, they're going to have to do more nuclear testing. Like, people would think, well, why would they ever need? We know everything we need to know. Well, we don't. It could very well be that we don't have the most optimal nuclear weapon that is, maybe they're going to create something that has very, very low radiation effects, but has the exact same amount of acute effects, but no, post-acute fallout and stuff like that. Maybe they want to fine-tune them for that purpose, or they want to fine-tune them for EMP, or they want to fine-tune them so that they can, drop them in the enemy's deep underground military bunker, command and control. There's a lot of levels to this arms race that we're not privy to. It's a whole other universe of things and complicated things. I've been talking to somebody in via email exchange, and they've opened my eyes to how little I actually know about the rocket science aspects of all of this stuff and the physics of it. And it's a very sophisticated area where we as the masses are just really at the whim of the scientists who are pushing the buttons on the other side. But that's basically the gist of it. Yes, it wasn't an underground nuclear bomb that was detonated, but then again, we don't really know, okay? Like I say, there's these people patting themselves on the back, stating the obvious, that this wasn't a nuclear test and that it's misleading headlines. Well, it really isn't, because it's a step in that direction, a step that we couldn't have imagined ourselves taking just a year ago, much less 2 years ago, okay? So yeah, it's very significant, which is all the more reason why you gotta prepare now. Everything could just fall apart tomorrow. That's where we're at. It all could just fall apart. China could just say, screw it, screw this 800 billion, we're just gonna take the loss and we're gonna invade Taiwan. That could be what happens. If that happens, all bets are off. We're already in a different world. Like Biden said, we are at an inflection point, and that means a major disruption is currently occurring, and it's going to get exponentially worse. Thanks for watching, folks. Take care and stay tuned, because we have our buddy, the world's foremost private bunker builder, Ron from Atlas Survival Shelters. And we had a conversation the other day about what the governments of the world are working on, what some of his high-profile clients are asking for in terms of the bunkers that they want built, and just the insane level of interest in activity in that space. And it's not looking good. I can tell you right now that there's things that exist that would completely make your jaw drop, okay? And we can't disclose because there's NDAs and stuff, but I mean, I wish I could, because it would motivate people to prep, but just know that the people in power, the gangsters that run the world, they have a plan, and it doesn't involve you.
He joins us now with reaction, along with attorney, also Harvard professor